The scent of rosemary and garlic hung thick in the air at Bellanova, mixing with the soft notes of expensive cologne and wine that defined every evening shift. My feet ached inside the worn black flats I'd been wearing for 6 months straight, the same ones I'd bought from a secondhand store when I first started working here. Each step across the polished marble floor sent a dull throb up my calves, a reminder that I'd been standing for nearly 7 hours without a proper break. I moved between tables with practiced invisibility, the kind of silence you learn when you grow up watching your father work undercover, when you understand that sometimes the safest place is where no one thinks to look. The white button-down shirt and black pencil skirt that made up my uniform felt like armor, a costume that let me disappear into the background of other people's important nights. Bellanova wasn't just any restaurant. It was the kind of place where senators dined with lobbyists, where business deals worth millions were sealed over plates of handmade pasta, where the city's elite came to see and be seen. The chandeliers overhead cost more than I'd earn in 5 years, each crystal pendant catching the warm light and scattering it across damask tablecloths and gleaming silverware. My manager, Vincent, appeared at my elbow with his usual expression of barely contained irritation. His cologne was too strong, as always, and the way he looked at the female staff made my skin crawl. "Lucia, table 7 just sat. VIP reservation. Don't mess this up." His voice carried that edge of condescension he reserved specifically for me, as if I hadn't been handling VIP tables perfectly for months. I nodded without meeting his eyes, gathering menus and mentally preparing myself for another performance of gracious service. Table 7 was in the private alcove near the back, partially hidden by a decorative screen of carved wood that afforded its occupants a measure of privacy the regular dining room couldn't provide. As I approached, I could already sense something different about tonight. The air felt charged, the way it does before a thunderstorm, heavy with anticipation that makes the hair on your arms stand up. My father used to call it cop instinct, that sixth sense that tells you when something is about to go wrong. I'd inherited it from him, along with his green eyes and his inability to ignore danger. The man at table 7 looked up as I arrived, and for a moment, the practiced greeting died on my lips. Raphael Bellori. I'd seen his photo in newspapers, always in the society pages rather than the crime section, though everyone knew what those carefully worded articles really meant. Owner of half the city's most exclusive properties. Philanthropist. Businessman. Euphemisms for a man who controlled an empire built in shadows. He was younger than I expected, perhaps 35, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. Sharp jawline, high cheekbones, and eyes the color of espresso that seemed to catalog everything they touched. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored to broad shoulders, and a platinum watch caught the light as he reached for his water glass. Everything about him radiated controlled power, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. "Good evening, Mr. Bellori," I said, keeping my voice professionally neutral. "Welcome to Bellanova. May I start you with something from our wine list?" He studied me for a moment longer than necessary, and I fought the urge to fidget under that intense gaze. "The 2015 Barolo," he said finally, his voice carrying just a trace of an Italian accent that softened certain consonants. "And I'll need a few minutes with the menu." I nodded and retreated, hyper-aware of his eyes following my movement. As I headed toward the wine cellar, I noticed 3 men who'd been seated near the entrance. Something about them set off alarm bells in my head. They were dressed well enough to fit in, but their attention wasn't on their menus or their conversation. It was fixed, almost imperceptibly, on table 7. My father's voice echoed in my memory. "Watch the hands, Lucia. Hands tell you everything." These men kept their hands below the table or inside their jackets, positioned in ways that suggested they were concealing something. Their eyes moved in synchronized sweeps of the room, professional and practiced. And they were too still, too focused, like predators waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I retrieved the Barolo with trembling fingers, my mind racing. This wasn't paranoia. I'd grown up around law enforcement, had learned to read body language and threat assessment before I learned algebra. Every instinct I had was screaming that those men weren't here to dine. As I returned to table 7, I saw one of the men touch his ear, an earpiece, barely visible. They were coordinated. This was planned. And Raphael Bellori, sitting there reading his menu with casual elegance, had no idea he was being hunted. I approached his table, my heart pounding so hard I was certain he could hear it. This was insane. I was a waitress, not a bodyguard. I should call the police, alert Vincent, do something official and safe and reasonable. But my father had also taught me that sometimes, by the time help arrives, it's too late. "Your wine, sir," I said, setting the bottle down with hands that only shook slightly. I began the familiar ritual of presenting the label, uncorking the bottle, but my mind was working frantically. How could I warn him without causing a scene that might trigger whatever these men were planning? Raphael nodded his approval of the wine, and I poured a small amount for him to taste. As he lifted the glass, I leaned in slightly, pretending to adjust the placement of his water glass. "When I drop the tray," I whispered, barely moving my lips, my voice so low it was almost subvocal. "Run." His hand froze midway to his mouth. Those dark eyes snapped to mine, and I saw the instant calculation there, the lightning-fast assessment of whether I was crazy, dangerous, or telling the truth. Whatever he saw in my expression must have convinced him, because he gave the slightest nod, so subtle anyone watching would have missed it. I straightened, picked up an empty tray from a nearby station, and deliberately positioned myself between his table and the three men who were now shifting in their seats, hands moving inside their jackets. My palms were slick with sweat. This was the stupidest thing I'd ever done. I was about to destroy my job, my reputation, possibly my life, based on instinct and a dead father's training. But those men were reaching for something, and every fiber of my being screamed that it wasn't a phone or a wallet. I let the tray slip from my fingers. The crash of metal against marble was deafening in the elegant space, loud enough to make every head in the restaurant turn. In that fraction of a second of confusion, I saw Raphael move with surprising speed, rising from his chair just as one of the three men drew a weapon, a pistol with an extended barrel that I recognized as a suppressor. The muffled pop that followed was nothing like guns sound in movies. It was a soft, almost polite sound, barely audible under the gasps and screams that erupted as diners registered what was happening. A wine glass on Raphael's table exploded, spraying burgundy liquid across the white tablecloth like blood. "Get down!" I heard someone shout. But Raphael was already moving, his hand closing around my wrist with shocking strength as he pulled me toward the kitchen. Behind us, more of those soft pops punctuated the chaos of overturning chairs and panicked screaming. We burst through the kitchen doors into a controlled frenzy of confused chefs and prep cooks. Raphael didn't pause, dragging me through the maze of stainless steel counters and past startled staff members who pressed themselves against walls to let us pass. "Service exit," I gasped, finding my voice. "Through the storage room, back left." He changed direction without question, trusting my knowledge of the building's layout. We shoved through the storage room door, past shelves of dry goods and industrial containers, until we reached the heavy metal door that opened onto the alley behind Bellanova. The cold November air hit my face like a slap, sharp with the smell of garbage and rain. Raphael pulled me close against the wall, both of us breathing hard, his body a solid presence between me and the door we'd just come through. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice low and urgent. "How did you know?" "Lucia Hart," I managed between gasps. And I didn't know. I suspected. Those men, they weren't acting like normal customers. They were watching you, coordinating. My father was a cop. He taught me to notice things. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or a flash of respect. Died 5 years ago, in the line of duty. The familiar ache that accompanied those words was muted by adrenaline. "We need to move. If they're professional, they'll have the exits covered." As if to confirm my words, I heard voices at the far end of the alley, speaking in clipped, urgent tones. Raphael's hand tightened on my wrist, and he pulled me in the opposite direction, toward the street. A black SUV screeched to a halt at the alley entrance, and my heart stopped. But Raphael relaxed fractionally, pulling me toward it. "It's mine," he said as the door opened. "Get in." I hesitated for only a second before climbing into the back seat. The interior smelled of leather and that same expensive cologne Raphael wore. A man in the front passenger seat turned to look at us, his expression professionally blank, but his eyes sharp with assessment. "Drive," Raphael ordered. Take us to the Riverside safe house." As the SUV pulled away from Bellanova, I caught a glimpse of police cars arriving, their lights painting the wet street in alternating red and blue. My entire body was shaking now that the immediate danger had passed, the adrenaline crash hitting me with nauseating force. I'd just thrown away my job, possibly made myself a target. Definitely complicated my carefully constructed invisible life. All for a man I didn't know, based on instinct and training from a father who died believing that doing the right thing mattered more than staying safe. Raphael was watching me with those dark, assessing eyes. "You saved my life," he said finally. "Why?" I met his gaze, seeing my reflection in those depths. A woman with tangled blonde hair and wide green eyes, still wearing her waitress uniform, who looked as surprised by her own actions as he was. "Because someone had to," I answered simply, and I was the only one who noticed. The corner of his mouth lifted in something that might have been a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Lucia Hart." He repeated my name as if testing its weight. "It seems I'm in your debt. That's not a position I find myself in often." The SUV navigated through city streets with practiced efficiency, and I watched my old life recede through the tinted windows, wondering what exactly I'd just gotten myself into, and whether survival instinct and dead father's training would be enough to get me out alive. The safe house wasn't what I expected. Somehow, I'd imagined something utilitarian. Concrete walls, minimal furniture, the kind of temporary shelter you see in movies about witness protection. Instead, the SUV pulled into an underground garage beneath a modern building of glass and steel, rising 20 stories above the Riverside district, where penthouses started at prices I couldn't even conceptualize. Raphael's driver, a man he'd called Marco, parked with military precision and opened my door before I could reach for the handle. My legs felt unsteady as I stepped out, the adrenaline fully drained now, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion that made my bones feel like water. "This way," Raphael said, his hand at the small of my back, guiding me toward a private elevator with the same controlled touch he'd used pulling me through Bellanova's kitchen. His palm was warm through the thin fabric of my uniform shirt, and I was acutely aware of how inappropriate my outfit was for wherever we were going. The elevator rose smoothly, no buttons visible on the panel inside. Biometric security, I realized, watching Raphael press his thumb to a small scanner. The kind of technology that cost more than my yearly salary. The kind that said whoever lived here had secrets worth protecting with the best money could buy. We emerged into a foyer of marble and minimalist elegance. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the river, where lights from the opposite shore reflected in dark water like fallen stars. The furniture was all clean lines and expensive fabrics in shades of cream and charcoal. Original artwork. I recognized a Rothko that should have been in a museum, adorned walls painted in soft gray. "Sit," Raphael instructed, gesturing to a leather sofa that probably cost more than my car. "Marco will bring water. Are you hurt?" I shook my head, sinking onto the sofa and feeling completely out of place against its butter-soft surface. "No. Are you?" "No." He was studying me with that same intense focus from the restaurant, but now there was something else in his expression. Calculation mixed with what might have been genuine curiosity. "Tell me about your father." The request was unexpected, but something in his tone made it less intrusive than it should have been. "Detective James Hart. 20 years with the police force, 15 in organized crime division." The words came automatically, worn smooth by repetition. "He died during a raid that went wrong. Someone on the inside had tipped off the targets. He walked into an ambush." Raphael's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those dark eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss." It was 5 years ago. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the apartment. "After he died, my mother couldn't handle staying in the city. Too many memories. She moved to Arizona, remarried. I stayed. Couldn't leave the place where he'd lived and died. Felt like abandoning him somehow." Marco returned with water in a crystal glass that felt almost weightless in my hand. I drank gratefully, the cold liquid grounding me back in my body in this surreal moment. "The men at the restaurant," I said, setting the glass down on a coaster that appeared as if by magic in Marco's hand. "Who were they?" Raphael moved to the windows, hands in his pockets, his reflection ghostly against the night view. Professionals, hired by people who want to see my organization dismantled. He glanced back at me. Did you recognize them? No, but I know what professionals look like. My father used to bring his work home sometimes. Photos, case files. He'd quiz me on body language, threat assessment, said everyone should know how to spot danger. I managed a weak laugh. Never thought I'd actually use those lessons. Your father taught you well. Raphael turned to face me fully. Those men were Serbians, part of a crew that's been trying to move into territory I control. This is the third attempt on my life in 6 months. The casual way he discussed assassination attempts made my stomach clench. This was real. Not a movie or a news story, but the actual dangerous world my father had spent his career trying to dismantle. You should go to the police, I said, knowing even as the words left my mouth how naive they sounded. Raphael's smile was almost sad. The police can't help me, Lucia. The people who want me dead have resources that rival government agencies. Reporting the attack would only tell them I survived, and they'd try again. Better to let them wonder. So what happens now? I asked, fear creeping back into my voice. Those men saw me help you. They saw me warn you. If they're professionals like you say, they'll identify me. Come after me to get to you. Yes, he agreed, and I appreciated that he didn't try to soften the truth. They will. Which is why you're staying here, under my protection, until we can neutralize the threat. I stood abruptly, the reality of my situation crystallizing with sharp clarity. I can't just disappear. I have a job, an apartment, responsibilities. Your job at Bellanova is gone the moment you don't show up for your next shift, Raphael interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. Your apartment is already being watched. Marco confirmed it 20 minutes ago. There's a man in a sedan across the street, another in the coffee shop on the corner, both carrying concealed weapons. The room tilted slightly. How do you know that? Because the moment we left the restaurant, I had my people sweep your known addresses, your apartment, your usual routes, places you frequent. It's what I would do if I were them. Identify everyone who helped their target escape, eliminate potential witnesses, send a message. I sank back onto the sofa, my hands trembling. This is insane. I'm a waitress. I don't know anything about your business or your enemies. I just noticed 3 men acting suspicious and made a split-second decision. A decision that saved my life, Raphael said, moving to sit in the chair across from me, and made you a target. I'm sorry for that, Lucia, truly. But the reality is, you're safer here than anywhere else in the city right now. For how long? My voice came out smaller than I intended. Until we find the people who hired tonight's assassins and convince them that continuing this vendetta is more costly than walking away. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze holding mine. I know this isn't the life you chose, but I give you my word. You will be protected. Everything you need will be provided. And when this is over, you'll walk away with enough money to start over anywhere you want. I don't want your money, I said automatically, though the offer was tempting. I want my life back. Your old life is gone, he said, not unkindly. The moment you dropped that tray, everything changed. The question now is what kind of new life you build from this moment forward. I wanted to argue, to insist this was temporary, that things would go back to normal. But I'd grown up in a cop's household. I knew how these situations worked. Once you were marked by dangerous people, normal became a luxury you couldn't afford. A door opened, and a woman appeared, middle-aged, professionally dressed, with salt and pepper hair pulled into a neat bun. The guest room is prepared, Mr. Bellori. Thank you, Elena. Raphael stood, gesturing for me to follow. Elena manages the household. Anything you need, ask her. She's been with my family for 20 years. You can trust her. Elena's smile was warm but assessing as I rose on unsteady legs. This way, Miss Hart. I've laid out some clothes that should fit until we can get your sizes properly. I followed her down a hallway lined with more expensive art, my mind still reeling. The guest room was larger than my entire apartment, with a king-sized bed dressed in linens that looked like clouds, a sitting area with comfortable chairs, and an ensuite bathroom of marble and glass. "There are toiletries in the bathroom," Elena said, opening the closet to reveal several outfits in neutral colors. "Mr. Bellori thought you might want to shower and rest. It's been quite an evening." "That's putting it mildly," I muttered, then caught myself. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to be rude. I'm just overwhelmed." Elena's expression softened. "You saved his life. That's not a small thing. Try to rest. Things will look clearer in the morning." After she left, I stood in the center of the room, feeling like an actress who'd wandered onto the wrong stage. The clothes in the closet were expensive. I could tell by the weight of the fabric, the quality of the stitching. Cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, designer jeans in exactly my size. How had they known? The shower was almost obscenely luxurious, with water pressure that felt like a massage, and heated floors that kept my bare feet warm. I stood under the spray for a long time, watching my waitress persona wash away down the drain, revealing someone I didn't quite recognize underneath. When I finally emerged, wrapped in a towel softer than any I'd ever owned, I found Elena had left a tray with tea and small sandwiches. I hadn't realized I was hungry until I saw the food, and I ate mechanically while my mind tried to process the last few hours. My phone sat on the bedside table where I'd left it. 15 missed calls from Vincent, 3 from my roommate Sarah, and dozens of texts asking where I was, if I was okay, what the hell had happened at the restaurant. I started to reply, then remembered Raphael's words about my apartment being watched. A soft knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. I pulled on the silk robe Elena had left and opened the door to find Raphael, now dressed in casual slacks and a black sweater that made him look somehow more dangerous than the expensive suit had. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, and I noticed the tension around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried a weight that hadn't been there in the restaurant. "Too much adrenaline," I admitted, "and too many questions. I owe you answers." He gestured to the sitting area. "May I?" I nodded, curling into one of the chairs while he took the other. The city lights painted his face in shadows and illumination, making him look both younger and infinitely older. "The organization I run," he began. "It's been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather built it from nothing when he came to this country with $10 and a willingness to do what others wouldn't. Protection, importing, construction. All legitimate businesses that required certain unofficial arrangements to succeed." "You're telling me you're mafia," I said flatly. "I'm telling you I'm a businessman who operates in the gray areas between legal and illegal. Most of what I do is entirely legitimate. Some of it exists in spaces the law hasn't quite caught up to yet. And yes, some of it crosses lines that society has decided are important. My father spent his career putting people like you in prison," I said, surprising myself with the lack of venom in my voice. I should have been disgusted, outraged. Instead, I felt only a strange, detached curiosity. "And I respect that," Raphael said. "The world needs people like your father, drawing lines and defending them. But it also needs people like me, operating in the spaces those lines don't reach. The gray areas where laws are unjust or inadequate, where people need protection the system can't or won't provide. That's a convenient rationalization. It's the truth as I see it." He didn't look away from my skeptical gaze. "I won't pretend to be something I'm not, Lucia. I've done things that would horrify you, hurt people, made decisions that keep me awake at night. But I've also protected hundreds of families, kept neighborhoods safe, provided opportunities where none existed. And the people trying to kill you? What line did you draw that they're trying to erase?" His expression darkened. "They want what I have. Territory, influence, profit streams. This city has been stable for 10 years under my family's control. These Serbian groups, they see opportunity in disruption. They think if they can eliminate me, everything I've built will fracture and they can claim the pieces. So this is about money. It's always about money, power, or revenge, usually all 3. He stood, moving to the window with that same restless energy I'd noticed earlier. "My father died protecting this organization. My uncle before him. I've been running things for 5 years, and every day someone wants to test whether I'm as strong as they were. I studied his reflection in the glass, seeing past the expensive clothes and cultivated power to something more human underneath. Are you? I don't know, he admitted, surprising me with the vulnerability in his voice. Some days I think I am. Other days, like tonight, I realize how fragile it all is, how one professional with a clear shot could end everything I've built. But they didn't, I said softly, because a waitress with cop training dropped a tray at the right moment. He turned, and his smile was genuine this time, reaching his eyes and transforming his face. Because a remarkably observant woman with more courage than sense decided a stranger's life was worth risking her own for. The warmth in his voice made something flutter in my chest, and I looked away, uncomfortable with the sudden intimacy of the moment. I should try to sleep. It's been an impossible night. It has. He moved toward the door, then paused. Lucia? Thank you. I know you didn't ask for any of this, but I'm grateful you were there tonight. And I promise you, you will be safe here, whatever it takes. After he left, I lay in the impossibly comfortable bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile the dangerous man from the news stories with the one who'd just shown me a glimpse of his humanity. My father had taught me to see criminals as enemies, as people to be stopped and brought to justice. But Raphael didn't fit that simple narrative. He was complicated, layered, both dangerous and protective in ways that confused my inherited moral compass. As I finally drifted toward sleep, my last coherent thought was that I'd crossed some invisible line tonight. Not just by saving Raphael's life, but by beginning to see him as something more than the villain in my father's war. And I had no idea if that made me brave, foolish, or something else entirely. Morning arrived with soft golden light filtering through curtains I didn't remember closing. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't place where I was. The bed too comfortable, the room too quiet, the air carrying a faint scent of coffee, and something baking that didn't match my tiny apartment's permanent smell of old carpet and neighbors cooking. Then reality crashed back. The restaurant, the assassins, Raphael Bellori, and his dangerous world that I'd stumbled into like Alice down a very different kind of rabbit hole. I found clothes laid out on the chair, designer jeans that fit perfectly, a soft gray sweater in cashmere, and undergarments still in their packaging. The precision with which my sizes had been determined was both impressive and unsettling. How long had Raphael's people been watching me to know these details? The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it sparked something else. A realization that I'd been invisible for so long, deliberately making myself small and unnoticeable. That being truly seen, even in this dangerous context, felt almost like relief. I dressed quickly and followed the smell of coffee to a kitchen that belonged in a design magazine. Elena was there, moving with practiced efficiency between a professional-grade espresso machine and what appeared to be fresh pastries cooling on a marble counter. Good morning, Miss Hart. I hope you slept well. Better than I expected, I admitted, accepting the cappuccino she offered. The first sip was revelation, rich and perfectly balanced in a way that made the coffee from my usual corner shop taste like dishwater. This is incredible. Mr. Bellori insists on good coffee. It's one of his few indulgences. Elena set a plate of pastries before me. He's in his office but asked me to tell you he'd like to speak with you when you're ready. No rush. I ate slowly, savoring food that tasted like it had been made with actual care, rather than microwaved in a commercial kitchen. Through the kitchen windows, I could see the river below, morning sun turning its surface to hammered gold. Joggers moved along the waterfront path, and a few early sailboats cut white trails through the water. Normal people doing normal things while I sat in a mobster's penthouse, eating pastries that probably cost more than my daily wage. Raphael's office was at the end of another art-lined hallway. The door was open, and I found him behind a massive desk, reading something on a tablet, phone pressed to his ear. He gestured for me to enter, and I perched on one of the leather chairs facing his desk, trying not to stare at the view through the windows behind him. The entire city spread out like he owned it, which in some ways, he probably did. Understood, he said into the phone, his voice carrying an edge of command I hadn't heard before. I want eyes on every property they're known to use. No moves until we have solid intelligence. Caution over speed. He ended the call, and set the phone down with deliberate care. "Good morning. How are you feeling?" "Confused, scared, surprisingly well rested." I met his eyes across the desk. "Your turn. How bad is this?" His appreciation for my directness showed in the slight smile. "The men from last night were professionals," as I said. "We've identified 2 of them from security footage, Serbian nationals with extensive criminal records in Eastern Europe. The 3rd is still unknown, but his method suggests military training." "They're not going to just give up," I said, stating the obvious. "No, they were paid well, and failure carries consequences in their world. They'll regroup and try again, probably targeting both of us now." He stood, moving to a credenza where a coffee service waited. "More coffee?" I nodded, watching as he poured with the same controlled grace he applied to everything. "What's your plan?" "Information gathering first. We need to know who hired them, who's funding the operation, what their timeline looks like. Then we dismantle the threat at its source." He handed me a fresh cup. "In the meantime, you stay here where I can guarantee your safety." "For how long?" "As long as necessary." He returned to his desk, but instead of sitting, he leaned against its edge, closer to my chair. "I know this isn't what you want to hear, but there's no timeline I can give you. These situations resolve when they resolve." I sipped the coffee, buying time to organize my thoughts. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Last night, you said your father died protecting this organization. What did you mean?" Something shifted in his expression. Pain, quickly masked, but not quite fast enough. "My father, Dominic Bellori, ran the family business for 25 years. He was strong, smart, absolutely ruthless when necessary. But he was also fair. He believed in loyalty, in protecting the people under his umbrella. 5 years ago, a rival organization decided to test his strength. They started small, stealing shipments, intimidating his allies, making moves to undermine his authority. Raphael moved to the window, his back to me, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. My father could have responded with overwhelming force, could have started a war that would have left bodies in the streets. Instead, he tried negotiation, tried to find a peaceful solution that wouldn't endanger innocent people. What happened? They saw his restraint as weakness, arranged a meeting under the pretense of peace talks, and ambushed him. His voice remained steady, but I could hear the grief underneath. 11 bullets. He survived long enough to tell me to be smarter than him, to never mistake mercy for weakness, to never let people see compassion as something they could exploit. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "That's a terrible burden to carry." He turned back to face me, and there was something raw in his eyes. The worst part is, I don't know if he was right. Should I have learned to be harder, more ruthless? Or should I honor his belief that there's a better way to do this, even if it got him killed? The vulnerability in the question surprised me. This wasn't the untouchable mob boss from the newspapers. This was a man still trying to figure out how to fill shoes that didn't quite fit. "My father believed in the law," I said slowly, working through my thoughts as I spoke. Believed that systems and rules were what separated civilization from chaos. And that belief got him killed too, when he trusted that the system would protect him from corruption within its own ranks. Raphael moved back to his chair, settling into it with visible exhaustion. "So what's the lesson? That believing in anything gets you killed?" "Maybe," I admitted. "Or maybe that the world is more complicated than either of our fathers understood. That there's space between lawful good and criminal evil where most people actually live. Gray areas. The gray areas I mentioned last night. Yes. Though I'm still not sure I agree with your interpretation of them." I set down my coffee cup. "Can I ask you something else? Something more current?" "Of course. How much danger am I actually in? Give it to me straight. No protective hedging." He studied me for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth I could handle. "Significant danger. The people who hired last night's team have resources. If they've identified you as someone who helped me, they'll consider you either a witness to eliminate or leverage to use against me. Probably both. And you can protect me from that? Yes. No hesitation, absolute certainty. This building has security that rivals government facilities. My people are the best at what they do. As long as you're here, you're safe. But I can't stay here forever. No. Which is why we need to resolve this quickly. He pulled up something on his tablet, then turned it to show me. Security footage from last night, showing the 3 men entering Belanova, their movements synchronized and purposeful. One of my people has a contact in Serbian intelligence. We're working to identify the 3rd man and trace their funding back to whoever hired them. I watched the footage, seeing myself in the background of one frame, moving between tables with my tray. I looked so normal, so unaware of what was about to happen. How long does intelligence gathering usually take? Days to weeks, depending on how well they've covered their tracks. He paused. I know that's not the answer you want, but I won't lie to you about timelines or danger. I appreciate that. I stood, moving to the window to look out at the city. This is my father's old precinct down there, the waterfront district. He used to walk those streets every day, trying to make them safer. And now I'm hiding in a penthouse above them, under the protection of someone he would have considered the enemy. Does that bother you? Raphael's voice was closer than I expected. He'd moved to stand beside me at the window, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something subtle with notes of cedar and spice. It should, I said honestly. But mostly I just feel lost, like I don't know who I am anymore. The daughter of a cop who would hate what I'm doing? A woman who made a split-second decision to save a life? Someone who's starting to see that the world isn't as black and white as I was raised to believe? You're all of those things, he said softly. People are complex. We contain multitudes, contradictions. The fact that you're struggling with this means you're thoughtful, not that you're wrong. I turned to face him, struck again by the disparity between his reputation and the man standing before me. Who are you, really? Not the newspaper version or the dangerous boss, the actual person. Rafael Antonio Bellori, son of Dominic and Isabella, brother to Maria, who died when she was 16, graduate of Columbia Business School, though my education came more from the streets than the classroom. Collector of art I don't entirely understand, but find beautiful anyway. Terrible at relationships because I trust too easily or not at all. And lately, very tired of the life I inherited, but don't know how to change. The honesty in his answer deserved honesty in return. Lucia Marie Hart, daughter of James and Catherine, who divorced when I was 12 over whether his job was more important than his family. No siblings. Associate's degree in hospitality management that I've done nothing with because I'm better at hiding than achieving. Reader of mystery novels I'll never solve as cleverly as the detectives. And lately, questioning everything I thought I knew about right and wrong. We're quite a pair, he said, and there was something in his smile that made my heart skip. The cop's daughter and the mobster, both trying to figure out how to honor our fathers while becoming ourselves. The moment stretched between us, charged with something I didn't want to examine too closely. This was dangerous territory, not the physical danger of assassins and Serbian hitmen, but the emotional danger of connecting with someone I shouldn't, seeing humanity where I was supposed to see only threat. A sharp knock on the office door broke the tension. Marco entered, his expression grim. Boss, we have a problem. One of our informants just called in. The Serbians are putting out word on the street. They're offering $50,000 for information on the woman who helped you escape. My blood ran cold. $50,000. The number seemed abstract, impossibly large, but I understood what it meant. People would sell their own mothers for that kind of money in certain neighborhoods. Increase security protocols, Raphael ordered immediately. Full lockdown on this building. Background checks on every staff member, every delivery person, anyone who has access. I want to know about every person who so much as walks past our front door. Already in motion, Marco confirmed. But boss, there's more. They have her name. They're circulating photos from the restaurant's security footage. It's detailed. Her face is clear enough for identification. Raphael's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. How did they get restaurant footage? Someone on staff sold it. We're working to identify who, but the damage is done. Her identity is no longer secret. I sank back into the chair, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. It was one thing to be in abstract danger, Quite another to know there was a price on your head, your face being passed around criminal networks like a wanted poster. Lucia. Raphael knelt beside my chair, his hands gripping the armrests on either side of me, his face level with mine. Look at me. You're safe here. I won't let anything happen to you. You can't promise that, I whispered. $50,000. People will try anything for that kind of money. Let them try. His voice was cold steel now, the dangerous man from the newspapers surfacing. I have resources they can't imagine. Anyone who comes for you will regret it for however long they have left to live. The absolute certainty in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it was oddly comforting, knowing that someone with his power and resources had decided I was worth protecting. What do we do now? I asked, forcing strength back into my voice. Now, he said, standing and helping me to my feet. We accelerate our timeline. If they're moving this aggressively, it means they're either very confident or very desperate. Either way, we don't wait for them to make the next move. We take the fight to them. How? His smile was cold and calculating. We use their desperation against them. Make them think they've found you. Draw them into a trap and end this permanently. Using me as bait, I said, remembering my words from last night. Using them as bait, he corrected. You'll be protected every second, surrounded by my best people. They'll never get close enough to touch you. But they don't know that. They'll come thinking they can collect their bounty, and instead, they'll walk into an ambush that ends their operation permanently. It was risky, dangerous, and probably insane. But the alternative was hiding in this luxurious prison indefinitely, waiting for the threat to somehow resolve itself while more people learned my name and my face, while the price on my head drew more hunters. Okay, I heard myself say. Tell me what you need me to do. Raphael's expression shifted, respect mingling with concern. Are you sure? Once we start this, there's no backing out halfway through. I'm sure. I was surprised to find it was true. I didn't ask for any of this, but I'm in it now. Better to end it on my terms than wait for them to choose the moment. He studied my face, searching for doubt or fear. Whatever he found must have satisfied him because he nodded once, decisively. Then we plan. Marco, call Giovanni and Stefano. We have work to do. As Marco left to make the calls, Raphael turned back to me. This will be dangerous. More dangerous than last night, because last night you had the element of surprise. This time they'll be expecting trouble. But they won't be expecting to walk into a trap, I said, understanding his strategy. They'll think they've found an opportunity, not an ambush. Exactly. He pulled out his tablet, already sketching out a plan. We'll need the right location, the right bait to draw them in, and impeccable timing. And after, I asked, after we spring this trap and hopefully catch the people behind this, what happens to me? He looked up from the tablet, his dark eyes holding mine. That depends on you. I meant what I said last night. When this is over, you can walk away with enough money to start fresh anywhere you want. New city, new name if necessary, a clean break from everything that happened. Or, he said slowly, you could stay. Not as a prisoner or someone under protection, but as someone with a place in this world. Someone whose skills and instincts proved valuable. Someone I'd like to know better without the immediate threat of death hanging over both our heads. The offer hung in the air between us, weighted with implications I wasn't ready to examine. But before I could respond, Giovanni and Stefano arrived, and the conversation shifted to tactics and strategy, transforming me from victim to active participant in my own survival. As I listened to Raphael outline the plan, I realized that something fundamental had shifted inside me. I was no longer just James Hart's daughter, trying to honor his memory by staying invisible and safe. I was becoming someone new, someone who dropped trays and sprung traps, who saw danger coming and ran toward it instead of away. My father had taught me to recognize evil and fight it through legal channels, but Raphael was teaching me that sometimes survival required operating in those gray areas, making choices that weren't clearly right or wrong but simply necessary. And somewhere between the cop's daughter I'd been and the woman I was becoming, I was starting to find someone I could actually live with. The plan took shape over the next 2 days, each detail calibrated with the precision of a surgical strike. Raphael's people gathered intelligence with frightening efficiency, tracking communications, monitoring known Serbian meeting spots, identifying patterns in their operations. I watched it all from the safety of the penthouse, learning the mechanics of a world I'd only seen through my father's frustrated case files. "They're sloppy," Giovanni reported during one of the planning sessions. He was Raphael's head of security, a former military man whose calm demeanor masked a ruthless competence. Confident because they think they're hunting a civilian. They've been asking questions in the restaurant district, showing your photo at hotels, trying to find where you might be hiding. "Good," Raphael said, studying a map of the city spread across his desk. "Confidence makes them predictable. Have they identified any likely locations?" "They're focusing on the hospitality district. Makes sense. They assume a waitress would know people in that industry, might be hiding with restaurant or hotel workers." Giovanni pointed to an area on the map. "Specifically, they've been concentrating on the Riverside Hotel area. There's a network of service apartments behind the main building, staff housing that would be perfect for someone trying to stay off the grid." Raphael's eyes met mine. "What do you think? Does that fit your world well enough to be believable?" I studied the map, remembering my own apartment search when I'd first moved to the city. "Yes. Those service apartments are exactly where someone like me would hide. Cheap, temporary, places that don't ask many questions. If I were actually running, that's probably where I'd go. Then that's where we'll let them find you." He traced a route with his finger. "We'll stage it carefully. Let word slip to one of their informants that someone matching your description was seen entering the service building. Give them time to set up their approach. Then we control every variable." "What about actual residents of those apartments?" I asked. "We can't put innocent people at risk." Raphael's expression softened slightly. "We own the building. It's primarily used for our own people. Employees, family of employees, people under our protection. Everyone currently there knows what's happening and has been relocated temporarily. The only people in that building when they arrive will be my men." Over the next day, the trap was meticulously prepared. I watched from security monitors as Raphael's people transformed one of the service apartments into a convincing safe house. My clothes from the restaurant, recovered from my actual apartment, were scattered realistically around the small space. A photo of my father sat on the bedside table. Even coffee in my preferred brand sat in the kitchenette, details so thorough that walking into that apartment, you'd believe I'd been living there for days. "This feels too elaborate," I said, watching the preparations. "Won't they be suspicious that everything points too perfectly to me?" "They'd be suspicious if it were easy," Raphael explained. "But this looks like the result of investigation, of putting together clues. Your waitress uniform hanging in the bathroom, a library book you'd checked out last month on the coffee table. These are breadcrumbs that seem discovered, not planted." Elena appeared with lunch, soup and sandwiches that I could barely taste through my anxiety. The plan called for me to be in the apartment when the Serbians arrived, protected by Raphael's people, but visible enough to draw them in. The risk was calculated, but still very real. "You don't have to do this," Raphael said, finding me in the guest room where I'd retreated to think. "We can find another way. Use a decoy. Anything that doesn't put you directly in harm's way." "A decoy won't work," I said, surprising myself with my certainty. "They've seen my face. They'll know if it's not really me. And I'm tired of hiding, of being the victim in this story. If we're ending this, I want to be part of ending it." He studied me with that intense gaze that seemed to see past all my defenses. "Your father would have been proud of your courage, though he probably would have wanted to arrest me for putting you in this situation. My father died because he trusted the system to protect him from corruption," I said, voicing something I'd never admitted aloud. "Maybe he would have lived longer if he'd been willing to operate in your gray areas instead of insisting everything be black and white." "Don't romanticize what I do," Raphael warned. "Your father was a hero. I'm just someone trying to survive in a world he helped make slightly better." The complexity of his answer, the way he honored my father even while defending his own choices, made my chest tight with emotion I couldn't quite name. That evening, as the sun set and painted the river in shades of copper and gold, Giovanni gathered us in Raphael's office for final preparations. 12 men, all wearing dark tactical gear that somehow remained subtle enough not to draw attention. Stood at attention as Raphael outlined the plan one last time. "Our intelligence confirms they're planning to move tonight," he said, his voice carrying absolute authority. 3 men will approach the service building, likely the same team from the restaurant, eager to complete what they started. 2 more will provide overwatch from the parking structure across the street. We'll have counter-snipers in position to neutralize the overwatch team the moment they reveal themselves. And Keem. He pointed to a blueprint of the apartment building. The primary team will enter through the service entrance here, using stolen maintenance credentials. They'll take the stairs to the 3rd floor, apartment 3B, where Miss Hart will be visible through the partially open door. She'll appear to be alone, packing to leave, creating urgency that will rush their approach. Giovanni took over. The moment they breach the apartment, we move. Teams positioned in adjacent apartments will have direct line of sight and fire. Hallway team will block their retreat. They'll be contained in a kill box with no exit except surrender. "Rules of engagement?" one of the men asked. Raphael's expression turned cold. "Subdue if possible. Eliminate if necessary. Priority 1 is Miss Hart's safety. Priority 2 is capturing at least one of them alive for questioning. Everything else is secondary." The clinical way they discussed my protection as a military operation should have been disturbing. Instead, it was reassuring to see the level of professionalism, the way every variable had been considered and planned for. "What about me?" I asked. "What exactly am I supposed to do when they enter the apartment?" "Stay calm," Raphael said. "The door will be rigged to alert us the moment they touch it. You'll have approximately 5 seconds between their entry and our response. In those 5 seconds, your job is to look scared but not panicked, to back away from them toward the bedroom where you'll have hardened cover. Don't try to fight. Don't try to run. Just give us time to neutralize the threat." 5 seconds, I repeated, my mouth suddenly dry. 5 seconds, he confirmed. The longest 5 seconds of your life, probably. But then it's over. We end this tonight. As darkness fell, we moved into position. I rode in an unmarked van with Raphael and Marco, my nerves making it hard to breathe. The service apartment building looked entirely ordinary from the outside, but I could feel the weight of hidden eyes watching from a dozen vantage points. "Final communication check." Giovanni's voice crackled through the earpiece Raphael had given me. Around me, the tactical team confirmed their positions. Rooftop, adjacent apartments, hallway, parking structure overwatch. "We have confirmation the targets are mobile," another voice reported. 3 vehicles heading toward the Riverside district. ETA 15 minutes. Raphael turned to me in the confined space of the van. "Last chance to change your mind. Say the word and we abort. Find another way." I thought about my father, about the life I'd been living in invisible safety, about the woman who'd dropped a tray and changed everything. "I'm ready." He nodded, then did something unexpected. He took my hand and squeezed it gently. "You're braver than you know, Lucia Hart. When this is over, remind me to tell you that when I'm not terrified for your safety." The admission that he was afraid, this dangerous man who controlled so much, somehow made me feel less alone in my fear. Marco and 2 other guards escorted me to the apartment, their bodies forming a protective barrier around me until we were inside. The space was exactly as I'd seen on the monitors, but being physically present made it feel more real, more vulnerable. "We're right here," Marco said, pointing to the wall that separated this apartment from the next. "The moment they enter, we breach that wall and come through. 5 seconds, Miss Hart. Then you're safe." They retreated, leaving me alone in the quiet apartment. I positioned myself as instructed, packing a bag with clothes that weren't really mine, playing the role of a woman preparing to run. The earpiece in my ear carried the steady breathing of the team, an invisible tether to safety. "Targets are in the parking lot," Giovanni's voice announced. 3 men, approaching the service entrance. Overwatch team is setting up in the parking structure, exactly where predicted. I forced myself to keep moving, to maintain the illusion of normalcy even as my heart hammered against my ribs. Service entrance breach confirmed. They're inside the building. Elevator override in place. They'll have to take the stairs. 2nd floor now, moving slowly, checking their corners. Professional approach. Each update brought them closer. I could hear footsteps in the hallway now. Real sounds beyond the electronic voices in my ear. My hands trembled as I folded a sweater, and I had to remind myself to breathe. 3rd floor. They've spotted the apartment. Weapons drawn. 45 seconds to breach. Raphael's voice cut through the tactical chatter. Lucia, I'm right here. You're not alone. The doorknob turned. I watched it from the corner of my eye, my entire body tense with anticipation. The door swung open slowly, revealing 3 men in dark clothing, faces partially obscured by hats and turned-up collars. This was it. 5 seconds. They entered the apartment, fanning out with practiced efficiency. One pointed a weapon directly at me, and I saw his finger on the trigger, saw the calculation in his eyes as he assessed the threat I posed. "Nobody moves," he said in heavily accented English. I backed away, hands raised, just as I'd been told, toward the bedroom, toward cover, counting in my head. 1, 2. "Down on your knees," the gunman ordered. 3, 4. The wall behind me exploded inward. Literally exploded, a precise-shaped charge blowing a person-sized hole through the drywall. Raphael's men poured through, weapons raised, shouting commands in voices trained to dominate through sheer authority. "Weapons down. On the ground now." The hallway door crashed open simultaneously, more men entering, creating a crossfire that left the 3 Serbians with nowhere to go. In the confusion, Marco appeared beside me, his body shielding mine as he pulled me back through the hole in the wall into the relative safety of the adjacent apartment. I heard gunshots, 2 quick pops, then shouting in multiple languages. Through the hole, I could see one of the Serbians on the ground, clutching his leg. Another was face down with someone's knee on his back. The 3rd had his hands raised in surrender, weapon kicked away across the floor. "Overwatch team neutralized," a voice reported in my ear. Both targets secured without casualties. It was over. Less than 10 seconds from breach to complete containment. The precision was almost beautiful in its violence. Raphael appeared in the doorway, his eyes scanning me for injury. "Are you hurt?" "No." My voice sounded distant to my own ears, shock making everything feel dreamlike. "No, I'm fine." He crossed to me in 3 strides and pulled me against his chest, his hand cradling the back of my head in a gesture so protective it broke something loose inside me. I shook against him, adrenaline and relief and fear all crashing over me at once. "It's over," he murmured against my hair. "You're safe. It's over." Through the wall, I could hear Giovanni interrogating the prisoners, his voice calm, but promising terrible things if they didn't cooperate. They were talking, words tumbling over each other in eagerness to bargain for their lives. Raphael kept holding me while his people did what they did, keeping me sheltered from the worst of it. Eventually, Giovanni appeared in the doorway. "We have names," he reported. "The people who hired them, their financing routes, their operational structure. Everything we need to dismantle their entire network." "Good." Raphael's voice was cold satisfaction. "Start with the money. Cut off their funding and the rest will collapse on its own." As we left the apartment building, the danger finally, truly behind us, I realized that I'd crossed another invisible line tonight. Not just by serving as bait, but by choosing to trust Raphael's world over the safe certainty of my father's moral absolutes. The city looked different as we drove back to the penthouse. Less threatening, more full of possibilities. I'd survived. More than survived. I'd actively participated in my own salvation, stepping into danger with clear eyes and emerging stronger. Raphael's hand found mine in the darkness of the car, his fingers intertwining with mine, in a way that felt both comforting and full of promise. "When this is over," I said softly. "When the threat is truly eliminated and I'm free to make my own choice without fear influencing it, ask me again about staying." He turned to look at me, surprise and hope warring in his expression. "You'd consider it?" "I'd consider it," I confirmed. I'd consider a lot of things I never imagined possible before a night at Bellanova changed everything. His smile was genuine, unguarded in a way I'd never seen. "Then I'll ask, and I'll hope you find the answer you're looking for." As the city lights blurred past the window, I realized I was already finding it. The aftermath of the trap played out over the following weeks with the methodical precision I'd come to associate with Raphael's operations. The captured Serbians, facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of Raphael's particular brand of justice, provided detailed information about their organization. Names, locations, financial networks, everything needed to dismantle the threat piece by piece. I watched from the penthouse as Raphael's people worked, learning the mechanics of a world that operated on loyalty and fear in equal measure. Giovanni would brief Raphael each morning over coffee, discussing developments with the casual detachment of men reviewing quarterly earnings rather than orchestrating the destruction of a criminal network. "The money trail leads back to Dmitry Kozlov," Giovanni reported one morning, spreading photographs across Raphael's desk. I'd taken to joining these briefings, my presence accepted as natural by everyone involved. "He's been trying to expand into your territory for 2 years. The assassination attempts were his way of testing your defenses." Raphael studied the photos with cold interest. "Dmitry is old school. He won't negotiate, won't back down unless we give him no other choice." "We could eliminate him," Giovanni suggested casually. "Make it look like natural causes. Heart attack, stroke. The medical examiner we have on retainer could handle it cleanly." The casual discussion of murder should have horrified me. 6 months ago, it would have sent me running to the nearest police station. Now, I found myself analyzing the logistics rather than the morality. "No," Raphael said, surprising both Giovanni and me. "Killing Dmitry creates a power vacuum, and vacuums invite chaos. Better to make him understand that continued aggression costs more than potential gains." "How?" I asked, genuinely curious. Raphael's smile was cold calculation. "We go after his revenue streams. Import licenses he depends on mysteriously get tied up in bureaucracy. His properties fail health inspections. His business partners receive better offers elsewhere. We make cooperation more profitable than conflict." "Economic warfare instead of actual warfare," I said, understanding. "Cleaner, harder to trace, and no bodies to explain." "Exactly." Raphael looked at me with something like approval. "Your father would have called it corruption. I call it pragmatism." Over the following days, I watched Raphael's strategy unfold with elegant efficiency. Dmitry's shipping company found its permits under review. His restaurants faced unexpected visits from health inspectors who found violations that required expensive remediation. His political allies suddenly became unavailable, their phone calls unreturned. "He's asking for a meeting," Giovanni reported after 2 weeks. "Wants to discuss terms." Raphael nodded. "Set it up. Neutral ground, appropriate security protocols. And Giovanni? Make it clear that Miss Hart's safety is part of the terms. Anyone who threatens her, now or in the future, becomes my personal enemy." The meeting took place in a private room at one of the city's oldest restaurants, the kind of place where men had been settling disputes over white tablecloths and expensive wine since before Prohibition. I attended at Raphael's insistence, my presence a statement that I was under his protection, and anyone who forgot that did so at their peril. Dmitry Kozlov was in his 60s, heavyset, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades fighting his way to power. His eyes when they found me were calculating, assessing my value in this equation. "So this is the waitress who caused all this trouble," he said, his Russian accent thicker than his hired men had been. "You must be very special, Miss Hart, for Raphael to go to such lengths." "She is," Raphael replied before I could speak, his tone brooking no argument. "And she remains off limits. That's non-negotiable." Dmitry studied us both with undisguised interest. "I see. This is personal then, not business." "It's both," I said, surprising myself by speaking up. "Raphael protected me because I saved his life. But I choose to stay because I see the difference between your approach and his. You hire men to shoot people in restaurants. He finds ways to resolve conflict that don't endanger innocents." Dmitry laughed, though there was little humor in it. Spoken like someone new to this world. "Give it time, Miss Hart. You'll learn we're all the same underneath." "I disagree," Raphael said quietly. "And I'm offering you the chance to prove I'm right. We can continue this war, destroy each other's operations until there's nothing left but rubble and bodies. Or we can establish boundaries, agree to stay in our respective territories, and both profit without the cost of constant conflict." The negotiation that followed was conducted in that same quiet, almost cordial tone. Two powerful men dividing a city between them like generals drawing borders on a map. I listened and learned, understanding that this was how Raphael's world actually functioned, not through constant violence, but through calculated agreements backed by the threat of overwhelming force if those agreements were broken. "The girl remains untouchable," Raphael stated as one of his conditions. "Not just by you, but by anyone in your network. She's under my protection permanently. Harm to her means war." Dmitri nodded slowly. "Agreed. Though I hope she appreciates the privilege of such protection." "I do," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "I also appreciate that Raphael is giving you the chance to walk away from this with your life and your operations intact. That's more mercy than you showed him when you sent men to murder him over dinner." For a moment, tension crackled through the room. Then Dmitri laughed, genuine amusement this time. "She has fire, this one. Be careful, Raphael. Women with courage are more dangerous than enemies." "I'm counting on it," Raphael replied, his hand finding mine under the table. The meeting ended with an agreement in principle, details to be finalized by their respective lawyers. As we left the restaurant, Raphael pulled me aside. "That was incredibly risky," he said, though his tone held admiration rather than rebuke. "Dmitri doesn't respond well to being challenged, especially by women." "I know," I admitted. "But I needed him to understand that I'm not just some random civilian who stumbled into your protection. I chose this. I choose you." Something shifted in Raphael's expression. Heat and hunger, and something deeper that made my breath catch. We were standing in a hallway between the private dining room and the main restaurant, momentarily alone in a space that smelled of old wood and expensive wine. "Lucia," he said. My name both a question and a prayer. I answered by closing the distance between us, going up on my toes to press my lips to his. He responded immediately, one hand cupping the back of my head, the other pulling me against him as he deepened the kiss with an intensity that made my knees weak. This was different from the careful distance we'd maintained over the past weeks. This was acknowledgement of what had been building between us since that first night. Attraction, yes, but also respect, understanding, a recognition of souls that had found unexpected completion in each other. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Raphael rested his forehead against mine. "I don't want to be something you choose because you're afraid or grateful, or because you feel you have no other options." "You're not," I said firmly. "You're what I choose because I see who you really are. Not the dangerous man from the newspapers, or the crime boss from my father's case files. The man who honors his father's memory by trying to be better than simple violence. The man who protected a stranger because it was the right thing to do. I'm not a good man, Lucia. Maybe not by my father's definition, but you're good in ways that matter to me. You're honest about what you are. You protect the people under your care. You choose the least violent path when you can. That's a kind of goodness, even if it exists in those gray areas." He pulled me close again, his arms around me feeling like the safest place I'd ever known. "When this is truly over, when Dmitri's agreement is finalized and there's no more immediate threat, I want to do this properly. Court you, take you to dinner, show you parts of my life that aren't about danger and negotiation." "I'd like that," I said, smiling against his shoulder. Though I have to admit, the danger and negotiation have been kind of exhilarating. His laugh was warm against my hair. That's the Stockholm Syndrome talking. Or maybe I'm just discovering I like operating in the gray areas more than I thought I would. Over the following weeks, I settled into my new reality with surprising ease. Raphael insisted I stay at the penthouse while Dmitri's people finalized their withdrawal from certain territories. But it no longer felt like protective custody. It felt like coming home. Elena taught me to appreciate the art Raphael collected, explaining the history and significance of pieces I'd initially dismissed as expensive decoration. Giovanni showed me the security systems that kept the building safe, trusting me enough to explain vulnerabilities and protocols usually kept from civilians. Marco, the driver who'd first brought me to the safe house, became something like a friend, sharing stories about Raphael that revealed the man behind the reputation. But it was time alone with Raphael that I treasured most. Quiet mornings over coffee, discussing everything from politics to philosophy. Evenings spent cooking together in the vast kitchen, teaching each other dishes from our different backgrounds. Late nights on the terrace, watching the city lights, and talking about futures that seemed impossible, but increasingly inevitable. "My father would hate this," I said one night, wrapped in Raphael's jacket against the autumn chill, his arm around my shoulders. "He spent his career fighting men like you. And yet he raised a daughter brave enough and smart enough to save one," Raphael replied. "That's legacy, Lucia. Not the war he fought, but the values he instilled that let you make your own choices about right and wrong. Do you think there's room in the world for both of us? His version of justice and yours?" "I think the world is bigger than either or," Raphael said thoughtfully. "Your father's approach, working within the system, pushing for change through legal means, that's vital. It keeps society moving toward better. But my approach, operating in the gray areas, providing what the system can't or won't, that's necessary too. Maybe we need both to keep the whole thing balanced." The philosophical discussion was interrupted by his phone, Giovanni calling with news that Dimitri had signed the formal agreement. Territories were established, boundaries recognized, the threat officially neutralized. "It's over," Raphael said, ending the call. He turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You're free, Lucia. The danger has passed. Dimitri's agreement includes permanent protection for you, so even if you leave, you'll be safe." "And if I don't want to leave?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Then we discuss what staying looks like. Not as someone under my protection, but as an equal partner in this strange life I've built." He took my hand, his thumb tracing patterns on my palm. "I meant what I said weeks ago. I want to court you properly, give you the chance to choose me without fear or gratitude muddying the decision. Take me to dinner tomorrow night," I said. "Somewhere normal, where we're just Raphael and Lucia, not the crime boss and the waitress. And afterward, I'll give you my answer about staying." The next evening, Raphael took me to a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, far from the expensive establishments of Manhattan. No private rooms or security details, just us in a corner booth, eating pasta that was almost as good as Elena's, drinking wine that didn't cost more than my monthly rent. "This is where I grew up," Raphael said, gesturing to the neighborhood visible through the restaurant windows. 3 blocks from here. My father worked in a bakery before he started his own business. My mother cleaned houses." "Tell me about them," I said, wanting to understand the foundation that had built the man across from me. He talked for hours, sharing memories I suspected he rarely voiced. His father's fierce pride and fiercer loyalty. His mother's gentle strength and unwavering support. His sister Maria, dead at 16 from a disease his father's legitimate income couldn't afford to treat properly. "That's when everything changed," Raphael said quietly. "When my father realized that playing by society's rules meant watching your daughter die because you couldn't afford the treatment that might have saved her. He stepped into the gray areas then, did what he had to do to make sure no one under his protection would face that choice again." "And you've continued that," I said, understanding clicking into place. "That's why you built legitimate businesses, why you try to minimize violence, why you negotiate instead of just taking what you want by force. You're trying to honor your sister's memory by being better than the circumstances that killed her." "Is that so different from what you're doing?" he asked. "Trying to honor your father by being brave, by seeing nuance instead of absolutes, by choosing the hard path instead of the safe one." We were both products of loss and love, I realized. Both trying to live up to impossible standards set by people we'd loved and lost. Both finding our way towards something that honored their memory without being imprisoned by it. "I want to stay," I said, as we walked back to where Marco waited with the car. "Not because I'm afraid to leave, not because I'm grateful for protection. I want to stay, because I see a future here I never imagined possible. With you." Raphael stopped walking, turning to face me under a streetlight that painted his face in amber and shadow. "You're sure? This isn't an easy life, Lucia. There will always be threats, always be complications, always be choices between the right thing and the necessary thing." "I'm sure," I said, "because those same complications exist everywhere." At least here, I'll be facing them with someone who sees the world in the same complicated way I'm learning to see it. He kissed me then, slow and deep and full of promise. When we broke apart, both smiling, he pulled a small box from his jacket pocket. I was going to wait, he admitted. Give you more time, make it more romantic. But I've been carrying this for a week, hoping you'd choose to stay. Inside was a ring, elegant and understated, a single diamond on a platinum band. Not ostentatious, not a statement of wealth, but perfect in its simplicity. J.R. continue. It was my mother's, Raphael said as I stared at it. She gave it to me before she died, told me to save it for someone who saw past the surface to who I really am, someone brave enough to choose this life with clear eyes. It's perfect, I whispered, as he slipped it onto my finger. We married quietly a month later, in a small ceremony attended by Raphael's people, and no one from my old life. It should have felt like abandonment of everything I'd been. Instead, it felt like finally becoming who I was, always meant to be. Standing beside Raphael in front of a judge he probably owned, promising forever to a man my father would have arrested, I felt my father's presence like a blessing. He'd taught me to be brave, to make hard choices, to see clearly even when the truth was complicated. I was doing all of those things, just not in the way he'd expected. And somehow, I thought he'd understand. 3 months into our marriage, I discovered I was pregnant. The news arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Confirmed by a doctor, Raphael had insisted I see for what I'd assumed was just stress-related nausea. Instead, I found myself staring at an ultrasound image, a tiny bean-shaped cluster of cells that would become our child. Raphael was in a meeting when I returned to the penthouse, discussing something about shipping contracts with Giovanni, and several men whose names I'd learned not to ask about. I stood in the doorway of his office, the ultrasound photo clutched in my hand, trying to figure out how to interrupt. He looked up, saw my expression, and immediately ended the meeting. Out. All of you. Now. As the room cleared, he crossed to me with concern in his eyes. What's wrong? Are you hurt? I handed him the ultrasound. We're having a baby. The transformation in his expression was beautiful to watch. Shock giving way to wonder, wonder giving way to fierce joy. He pulled me into his arms, careful suddenly, as if I might break. Are you happy? He asked against my hair. Terrified, I admitted. And incredibly happy. Both at the same time. We stood like that for a long moment, both of us adjusting to this new reality. A child. Our child. Born into a world of gray areas and complicated choices, but also into love and protection and possibility. I want different for this baby, Raphael said finally, pulling back to look at me. Not the same path I walked, not the same certainties your father believed in. Something new, something better. Something honest, I agreed. We tell them the truth about what we do, what we are. We teach them to see nuance, but also to recognize their own moral boundaries. We give them the freedom to choose their own path, whatever that looks like. Over the following months, as my body changed and our child grew, I found my place in Raphael's world expanding in unexpected ways. I became involved in the legitimate businesses, my hospitality background finally useful, as I helped improve customer experiences at the restaurants and hotels he owned. I sat in on meetings, offering perspective that came from understanding both sides of the law. I became a bridge between Raphael's world and the legitimate one, using my past to help build a future. Elena fussed over me with maternal concern, ensuring I ate properly and rested enough. Giovanni assigned permanent security that made me feel simultaneously protected and conspicuous. Marco drove me to prenatal appointments, somehow managing to be intimidating and gentle at the same time. But it was Raphael's transformation that moved me most. The dangerous man who'd seemed carved from stone became almost tender, his hand constantly finding my growing belly. His voice soft when he spoke to our unborn child about the world they'd inherit. I want them to know your father, he said one night as we lay in bed, his palm warm against my stomach. James Hart. What he stood for. What he fought for. I want them to understand that his way wasn't wrong, just different from mine. that the world needs people like him. And people like you, I added, covering his hand with mine. People willing to operate in those gray areas when necessary. The baby kicked, a flutter of movement under our joined hands. Raphael's smile was pure wonder. Hello, little one. Your mother and I are going to do our best to show you all the colors between black and white. 4 weeks before my due date, everything changed again. Giovanni came to the penthouse at 3 a.m., his expression grimmer than I'd ever seen it. A turf dispute in the warehouse district had escalated beyond Raphael's ability to control it through economic pressure. People were threatening violence. Innocent people, dock workers, warehouse staff, caught between criminal organizations fighting for territory. We can contain it, Giovanni said, but it will require force, significant force. If we don't act decisively, people will die. I watched Raphael's face as he processed this information, saw the war between the man who preferred negotiation and the boss who understood sometimes force was the only language certain people understood. Do what's necessary, he said finally. But minimize casualties. Target only those actively making threats. And Giovanni? Anyone who targets civilians answers to me personally. After Giovanni left, Raphael sat in heavy silence, and I could see the weight of command pressing on him. This is the part you don't see in the quiet moments, he said. The part where good intentions aren't enough, where choosing the lesser evil is still choosing evil. Tell me, I said, lowering myself carefully into the chair across from his desk. He looked at me with those dark eyes that had first seen through my invisibility at Bellanova. The dispute is over dock access for shipping. One of Dimitri's competitors is trying to muscle in, using tactics that put workers at risk. They've already hospitalized 3 people who refuse to cooperate with their demands. If we don't respond, it sends a message that my protection is meaningless. So you respond with force. Controlled force. Targeted. But yes. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd come to recognize. This is who I am, Lucia. This is what I do. Some problems can't be solved with negotiations and economic pressure. Sometimes the only way to protect innocent people is to make bad people fear the consequences of hurting them. I understood what he was really asking, whether I could live with this version of him. The man who tried for peace but defaulted to controlled violence when necessary. The man who existed perpetually in those gray areas, making impossible choices with imperfect information. I know who you are, I said firmly. I knew when I chose to stay. This doesn't change anything except making me worry more about your safety. Relief and love mingled in his expression. I'll be careful. I always am. The operation that night was textbook Raphael, overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. The people making threats found themselves outnumbered and outgunned, given a simple choice. Leave the territory immediately or face consequences they wouldn't survive. Most chose to leave. The few who didn't learned why crossing Raphael Bellori was considered a fatal mistake. No dock workers were hurt. The violence, such as it was, remained contained to the criminal elements who'd created the situation. By dawn, the dispute was resolved, the territory secured, and the workers able to return to their jobs safely. But Raphael returned to the penthouse changed, the weight of command visible in his shoulders, in the lines around his eyes. He found me in the nursery we'd been preparing, sitting in the rocking chair Elena had insisted we needed, my hand on my belly where our child slept. It's done, he said quietly. The threat is neutralized. At what cost? 2 dead, 3 more in hospitals with injuries that will remind them daily not to threaten my people. He sank onto the floor beside my chair, his head resting against my knee. I tried everything else first, Lucia. I swear I did. I know, I said, running my fingers through his hair. This is the world we live in. You did what you had to do to protect innocent people. My father would understand that, even if he couldn't approve the methods. Would he? Raphael looked up at me, vulnerability stark in his expression. Or would he see me as just another criminal justifying violence? I thought about my father, about his black and white morality and unwavering belief in the law. But I also thought about his core value, protecting innocence, stopping those who would do harm, making the world safer for people who couldn't protect themselves. He would see someone who prevented 3 more hospitalizations, I said finally. Someone who chose the option that saved the most lives. The methods would bother him, but the outcome? That he'd understand. Raphael's hand found my belly, our child moving beneath his palm. I want better for them, for this little one. A world where these choices don't have to be made. Then we build that world, I said. One decision at a time. One choice to negotiate instead of fight. One agreement instead of a war. We use your position, your power, to make those gray areas a little lighter. It won't be perfect. It won't satisfy people on either extreme, but it will be progress. Over the following weeks, I watched Raphael implement changes I'd suggested. More investment in legitimate businesses, creating legal alternatives to illegal revenue streams. More support for community programs that address the root causes of crime. More partnerships with officials who believed in reform rather than just punishment. It was slow, incremental work. But it was work that mattered. When our daughter was born on a crisp spring morning, Raphael was there, holding my hand through every contraction, his dangerous reputation forgotten in the face of new life entering the world. Isabella Maria Bellori, named for his mother and sister, arrived with a fierce cry that made us both laugh and cry simultaneously. "She's perfect," Raphael whispered, holding her with careful reverence. "Absolutely perfect." I watched him with our daughter, this man who commanded an empire through fear and loyalty, reduced to helpless adoration by a tiny human who'd known him for mere minutes. This was the future we were building, not the lawful good of my father's world, or the necessary evil of Raphael's inheritance, but something new, something honest about its complications while still striving for better. Elena appeared with practiced efficiency, helping me into a clean gown while Raphael refused to put Isabella down. Giovanni came by later, bringing flowers and the barely disguised terror of a hardened man confronted with an infant. Marco sent a stuffed bear larger than the baby herself. But it was the quiet moment after everyone left, when it was just the 3 of us in the hospital room, that I treasured most. Raphael sat in the chair beside my bed, Isabella asleep against his chest, and looked at me with an expression of complete peace. "Thank you," he said softly, "for choosing this life, for seeing me clearly and choosing me anyway, for giving me this family I never thought I'd have." "Thank you for being worth choosing," I replied, "for being complicated and honest and brave enough to try being better." 6 months later, I stood in what used to be my father's precinct, now renamed in his honor, the James Hart Community Center, funded by anonymous donations I knew came from Raphael, provided everything from job training to after-school programs. It was exactly the kind of initiative my father had believed in, addressing crime's root causes rather than just punishing its symptoms. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father's legacy, preserved and expanded by money from a man he would have considered an enemy. But as I looked around at the families using the center's resources, at the lives being changed through opportunity rather than incarceration, I thought maybe Dad would understand. Maybe he'd see what I saw. That the world wasn't as simple as he'd believed, but that the core values he'd taught me could operate in spaces he'd never imagined. Raphael found me in the center's library, Isabella sleeping against my chest in her carrier. "Thinking about your father?" "Thinking he'd be confused but probably secretly proud," I said. "This is exactly what he wanted. Safer communities, better opportunities, people having alternatives to crime." "Built with dirty money," Raphael pointed out. "Cleaned by good intentions," I countered. "That's the gray area, Raphael. Money doesn't care where it came from, only where it goes. If it goes to helping people, does the source matter?" He pulled me close, careful of our sleeping daughter. "You've become quite the moral philosopher, Mrs. Bellori." "I learned from the best," I replied. "A cop who taught me to see clearly, and a crime boss who taught me that clarity includes understanding complexity." We stood there in the library built with complicated money honoring a simple man, our daughter between us representing a future that honored both their memories. Not perfect, not uncomplicated, but honest about what it was while striving for what it could become. The gray areas, I'd learned, weren't about compromising your values. They were about understanding that values could be honored in unexpected ways, through imperfect means toward better ends. My father had saved lives through law. Raphael saved lives through controlled power. And I, the daughter of one and wife of the other, was learning to honor both paths while forging my own. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.